Welcome to the Going Green podcast. In this episode, we're going to have a look at these new licenses that have been granted for North Sea oil and gas projects. And we're going to have a little discussion about whether they're a good idea or not. So let me throw this one over to you, Paul. Do you think that these North Sea oil licenses and gas licenses are actually a good idea?
Well, before we get, say, too involved in knowing sort of what the hell's happening, let's just go through and a bit of context in relation to it all. So, since 2016 or 2015, the government stopped all new licensing for North Sea oil and gas. Okay, so they stopped in all the projects to go through. Now, at the time, they said lots of new projects basically were coming to a close, and they were trying to decide whether or not they should actually go for new ones or attempt to rely on, essentially as in better hence of everybody else doing them, we'll just buy it in, essentially not being for us.
And do you mean buying from other countries here?
Yes. Yes, and also reliant on the transition to, of course, net zero to provide clean. And so that was the idea. If we sort of stop the licensings, then all the North Sea oil would just sort of, that were happening at the time, you can remember 2016-15, then they would expire by 2020. And then obviously we will then pursue the continuance of converting to, net zero or sort of carbon neutral processing, basically transitioning across. That was the idea of the clean, and that we don't need any oil and gas produced in this country to support the UK economy, because we can import it in and we can slowly wean ourselves off. So that's the context of relation to all those sorts of things. So,
but here comes the but, isn't it? This is the important bit.
Yeah. So anyway, so recently this year, 2023, the government has just started the process of reissuing new North Sea oil, gas and oil licenses, as in to go out there and drill for oil and gas. And they are expecting to allow a procedure where every year they want to then vote and give out licenses to do all new North Sea oil and gas drilling, essentially. And the major points they want to do that is, unfortunately, due to the Ukraine war, as in the Russian-Ukraine war or conflict or crisis or whatever you want to call it, oil and gas prices are shot up, and unfortunately the market's been so turbulent that basically we need not new oil and gas, but importing it has skyrocketed. The actual cost has skyrocketed. So they're hoping that with the idea of these new oil and gas licenses, that they're able to produce the oil and gas required for the UK economy locally, quote, locally being, not far away,
Yeah, you're talking North Sea, not
North
far
Sea,
away, yeah.
And that will bring in sort of, they said, lots of new jobs and things. But, it will, because it will pay for all the people to run in the North Sea oil stuff, as well as pay for and grow the economy, because quite a lot of the UK economy requires still oil and gas. And we're not talking directly being for burning, things like petrol, and for power station. We are talking for things like lubricant, lubricant oils, as well as doing other, not gases directly for burning, because most of the gas is for burning, but doing other bits, like they want to do some part of this hydrogen business, but of course they need fuel, as in methane, or at least natural gas, to actually produce the hydrogen, in which case then we can lean it. Yeah, it's a long problem.
Okay, so we've got a need going on not till we get to 2050 when we're going to be carbon neutral, but we're in fact well beyond that, where we're going to still need carbon fossil fuels for things like some plastics. And they don't have to be the evil plastics that don't decompose, they could be the biodegradable ones. We're also going to need oil for lubrication. We're going to need basically some oil to actually burn for certain applications where it's not going to work doing anything else. So we're still going to need some oil for some reasons. And various people just saying, yeah, get rid of oil completely. Well, that is literally then going to get the country to seize up.
Yeah,
with no lubricant at all.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, it's quite one of the things, and it's just a way of sort of the argument of saying, what they're trying to do. This is what they're actually looking at doing, is to try and get rid of that reliance of, I say, foreign oil, natural gas, and since we've got the North Sea oil, why don't we just use it? For us, if that's anything, it's one of those things where that's what the idea is. But, everybody's sort of not moaning. That's the wrong way to put it. But it is how can we talk, say, before going green in case for these oil fields to be drilled and things? Well, it's one of those, the idea is transitioning is that you still need to transition. You can't sort of go cold turkey because, of course, we're not prepared to, I say, go cold turkey. But as I said, we still need things like lubricants. We still need, say, the engine oils. I know we're going for
electric, but
motors.
they still have things like not gearboxes, but some of the cars have things like these sort of various drive shafts and other bits and pieces. Yeah, you can stick a motor on each wheel, or you might still want to have something like a passive axle, and then it still needs oiling, greasing, lubricating.
So that's, as I said. So those ideas is how a lot of the British economy still got need for oil and gas in relation to all these things. And so the idea, simply put, is instead of paying expensive imports, make it ourselves, which doesn't seem, not ludicrous. It doesn't seem a bad idea.
Well, they've even talked about coal mines as well. And again, when they're talking about opening a coal mine, it's not necessarily just to burn the coal, but it is because we can actually extract certain other chemicals from the coal to supply other sort of industries, what we call feedstocks.
Yeah, they were hoping to use this new coal. I can't remember. It's somewhere in Cornwall, isn't it?
I can't remember.
Anyway, this new coal mine.
Gone quiet.
Yeah. The idea is to not shudder anything, but to say, look, this coal is actually not for burning, but for doing clever things like making carbon fiber from it. Because whereas a useful way of making carbon fiber, daftly, is, say, not the graphite in pencils, but sort of scraping coal, basically sort of not sanding it down, but scraping at it and producing it that way. And we need carbon fiber. It's one of those things where how much carbon fiber we use, we're actually slowly using more and more and more and more of it. So that's trying to find that use for it. You see, and producing that locally means we, that helps apparently the economy. So that's the point. But people see coal mine and they go, you're going to use it for burning. But forgetting that, of course, in the UK, we don't have any coal power gas plants. Well, we actually do. We have two. I know we have two because occasionally they have to turn them on to do things. But
largely they're not using them. And they have converted Drax to basically use biofuels, haven't they? They sort of recycle bits of tree that nobody else wants. We apologise for the aeroplane flying overhead at the moment.
Or helicopter. Don't know which. Sounds more helicopter-like in regards to its flying around in circles. A plane will be just over. Anyway, but in relation to all that, it's one of those things where, of course, aviation fuel, where we're going to how we're going to get aviation fuel at the moment, and we don't make it necessarily ourselves. But the idea that North Sea oil is all bad, the answer is North Sea oil isn't exactly great at producing petrol. Well, we've known this because it's one of those things where importing petrol is still importing from the Arabs and the Saudis and that sort of direction, as opposed to what we were getting from Russia was actually not crude oil in relation to being sort of the black tar, but it was sort of this mess of just more for the not lubrications, but it was just not petrol clean fuel. It was all sort of
Let's say what the question really, what Paul's saying is, what is crude oil? And crude oil is simply a mixture. And in some countries, like the Middle East, they've got a lot of the smaller carbons, which makes it sort of smaller carbon chains. This makes it good for things like, petrol.
Yeah.
And in North Sea, they had very short carbon chains, which made it excellent for North Sea gas, but they also had a lot of much longer chains. Now, these much longer chains we can actually use, and we use a process called cracking. And what we do is we sort of basically heat them up with a catalyst with their air, and this produces lots of very useful compounds, which are called the alkenes. And these alkenes go on to be feedstocks for things like plastics. So the Arabs, in their fuel is basically alkanes, which are very good for fuel, for cars, etc., aircraft. And ours was sort of different, really.
Yeah.
And you want both.
Exactly. And this is the whole proponent of the whole idea, is that it is, just we need our bit, but we need a little bit mixture of all the different types of oil, you see.
So we've changed our sort of goalposts on cars, and we're not going to have to sort of go all electric just quite so soon. And that's just giving the industry perhaps a little bit more time. Now, is that necessarily a good idea? Well, talking still to friends who have got electric cars, they still have a lot of problems getting from A to B, especially if B's a long way from A, and they've got to sort of recharge on the way, because there are more and more recharging points coming, but we're not there yet, and we still need more and more to do that. And so the idea is we've got to try and grant more licenses to try and sort of, slow down the system so we've actually got time to adapt.
Yes. So one of the things they were talking about is inside these licenses, there are two types. There's, of course, exploratory licenses, and then there is just normal producing licenses. And actually what the government is actually proposing is not, out of, say, these hundreds of gas licenses they're going to issue, is they said 90% are going for producing licenses, with only 10% going to exploratory licenses, except they said only that 10% of the exploratory licenses will actually go for not brand new exploratory processing, but they might be going to old wells not to see if they're tapped out, but to see if there's any more inside those ones. So actually, it's one of those things when they're not actually looking at new exploratory oil fields, because we know quite a lot of the oil fields out there already. They've all been discovered and found and explored. It's now to actually...
Effectively, we're talking about some extensions to these, aren't we? These extensions to these fields, yes, where there might be this tiny little bit somewhere. And when I say tiny little bit, I actually mean quite a large, tiny little bit. so they can actually find it's going to be worthwhile. It just really staggers the mind trying to think about how much gas and oil are in these sort of gas and oil fields. The amounts are really quite staggering, and that's why we've got the problem we've got today with all this amount of carbon dioxide. If you consider how much you use when you drive yourself to work, how much CO2 you produce, and then you multiply that by everybody else. Just in this country, we're producing a huge amount of carbon dioxide, and that's got to go. But it's not the only thing that does that. We won't be able to get down to sort of carbon neutral just by doing that. There are many industries, especially the chemical industries, that produce carbon dioxide, not just things for heating, but in chemical manufacture. So we've got to worry about that. And they still need their feedstocks. And so we've still got to supply them with more sort of raw materials to keep them going, because, you know, this idea of just stopping oil sounds like a really good idea until you sit down and think about it and you work out, well, if we just do stop all our oil, we haven't got very much left to work with.
Yeah, it's one of those challenging, awful things of how much is, you can do the simple thing of how much is made using oil, and you just say, well, most chemicals are derivatives of oil, yeah, and then you sort of, we don't have any clothes or any nice pieces of stuff, so we're lacking, and that's the major crux of the whole thing. It is the idea of that people hear oil is bad, and the answer is it
It is.
it is, or it is bad. Now, I'm not saying it's great. I'm not saying it's sort of wonderful thing, as unlike some of the I say oil producing companies, all these sort of the BPs and Shells and all those things who slap on things such as we're developing clean technologies, and what we're doing is technically to make us clean and greener is, of course, we hire contractors to actually go out and do the North Sea oil. And so us, BP, we are clean and green, and our bad oil producing slash not green side of the company, they're actually individual contractors who, unfortunately, they can't be green because, of course, they haven't got the money of BP to do so, or whoever to do so. So it's one of those odd things where there's a little bit of greenwashing happening out there in relation to that, to showcase sort of right who is what's happening out there, being green, not being green, which is unfortunate because, of course, if you look at if they include those parts of their pines, you see they're not so green, and the answer is no. They want to show being green because being green apparently is cool.
Yeah. Well, let's move ahead to 2050. 2050 has arrived. We are now net zero. But basically, a quarter of our energy will still come from oil and gas. There will have to be still some domestic gas production, so some people can still have their heating. So this country is able to produce some of its oil and gas, and about, I don't know, a third of that is probably imported. But why do that? And this is the question that the Prime Minister's actually asked, is why do that when we've still got quite a lot of gas and other materials that are untapped at home? So that's their sort of the government's rationale behind this, that even when we reach carbon neutral 2050, if we do, then we're still going to be using still quite a lot. And we haven't gone to the stage where a lot of people are pretending they're talking about, which is going carbon negative or not using carbon at all. And that, quite honestly, is pie in the sky.
Yeah, this is what, as I said, this is all the crux of the sort of thing where people say, simple things like stop using oil. The answer is we 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 physically just can't. There is a problem in relation to all the feedstuff. Quite a lot of medicine is made from oil, or at least its derivatives. You see, as because of course gas in relation to that sort is quite abused as feedstock, and so suddenly you can't cut that because it's required. And the answer is, oh, you need to find new sources of it, and the answer is where. Where are these new sources? Unless you're willing to sort of uh, make say turn the grave sites, as in sort of graveyards, and sort of bury them really deep and sort of turn that into oil. And it's just, but unfortunately, it's the long term process doing those sort of things. And so I'm not saying we need to find greener, cleaner ways of making the feedstocks, things like biogas and sort of those sort of things. And these technologies, which we were hoping to be using and achieving, are taking a much longer time to develop. They sort of talk about carbon capture, we just suck air in and clean air comes out. And the answer is it's not quite how that works. And it's just not coming on. Things like electric cars, they haven't, yes, we started quickly and they've been slowly turning on, but we still haven't got enough charging stations. The power grid hasn't got the capacity yet to actually deal with the amount of electric cars.
And we have to remember, how do these electric cars get powered? Quite a lot still by electricity that's made from fossil fuels. We haven't got enough wind turbines. We haven't got enough solar, especially on days like today when we're playing a game called Spot the Sun.
No, I could spot it. It's that white thing that's sort of a bit sort of speckledy, like called the moon.
Yeah.
No, it's not quite that bad, but it is those sort of things where people thought, we'll be building up these wind turbines and getting enough, and sort of every house in the UK will have solar panels. And the answer is, if we were really certain to get rid of oil and gas, then we really would be putting solar panels on every single roof. Doesn't matter. Put it on literally all the sides of the houses, and you just slap them all over the place.
Yeah, except of course you do realise that we do need some fossil fuels to actually make our solar panels.
Gosh darn it! I wish I had known that. Yes, you can see the crux. You see, this is where we're talking about the problem of getting rid of the oil. Not quite there. We still need the feedstock, and the idea of doing things locally is much better idea than importing it, because how much problems of importing all that oil across I say wherever, as opposed to just I say pumping it in, shipping it in sort of from the local sort of backyard, is so much more. Now I'm not talking about sort of going for the fracking idea of things, but it's sort of taking a place where is no one going to notice North Sea oil, the seabed being sort of not disturbed, but being lower because there's all these pockets of being but they do try to fill them pockets up, so it's not sort of that bad. And there was a potential plan was to actually take the North Sea oil that's been used up and actually pump CO2 back into that, which is one of those hilarious dumb things, and actually convert oil and put the CO2 back in to then make oil so that the later generations will actually still have some North Sea oil to actually, or North Sea gas in that regard.
Does take quite a while to convert CO2 to methane, however. It isn't a quick process, but it can be done because, basically, we were seeing that process being done anyway, but it is a possibility there, but that's not a short-term solution, is it, Paul? It's gonna take sort of
a
maybe
while.
millions of years.
Yeah, so it's not the most, as I said, not the most ludicrous to do for a long term. So, but we've got to look at this, and it's unfortunate. I say unfortunate, but say people like the UN climate change agency. He's the man. I think it's the UN secretary, whatever his name is. He makes lots of good quotes. He's saying that the doing this idea is delusional. You're working against the system, and the answer is, well, not really, because it's sort of like, it's all right saying move to net zero without going, how am I meant to do that? Which is why we call these transitions. It's why they wanted to call, I think the EU wanted to call gas a transitions fuel source or something. Right?
Yeah, it's sort of the argument on gas is it does burn cleaner than other things like coal. Coal puts an awful lot of other noxious chemicals into the environment. But burning gas, although greener than that, is still chucking out an awful lot of carbon dioxide. And our way round this problem is to move to greener systems, to move to wind power, to move to wave power, to move to solar power. But it still won't get rid of this oil problem. We still must have some oil to do things. And I think this is the bit that some people forget. So if I grab my little banner and just say, just stop oil, and sit in the middle of the road,
it really should be.
It's going to, I was going to say, it not only brings the country to a halt, it's actually going to throw us probably back to the Stone Age. Except it's not, because if we went back to the Stone Age, we wouldn't have any electric, and so we'd have to start burning more wood again.
Yeah, it's a bit daft. But no, what they really should have on those posters, instead of just stop oil, is stop burning oil. Because, of course, using oil or being clever with the oil and actually creating things like, I say, plastics, and, I know they're bad, but you think biodegradable plastics in regards to those sort of things. Doing that with the oil is actually more beneficial than just burning it, because of course you're not removing CO2 in that way. You're just changing how it is. Instead of being a liquid, you made it a solid. That's all. You're still got it still captured, or not releasing the CO2 by that way. And so the idea of the poster should be just stop oil, should be stop burning oil. The simple words, but makes the difference.
But it wouldn't bring their message over. Yes, probably quite as well. That's the problem. So we've been looking at whether these new licenses in the North Sea oil for oil and gas North Sea for oil and gas projects, see whether they're a good idea. And unfortunately, and it is unfortunately, they still are a good idea to keep the country going.
Yeah, that's not the sad thing, but it is the idea of we still need them. They're still required and needed,
And we're still going to probably need them after 2050 when we've got to this magic
net zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
And then we can start moving to carbon negative. But is it all going to be too late? Well, that's probably a question that we're going to have to look at and return to in another episode of Going Green. You've been listening to the Going Green podcast, looking at here new licenses for the North Sea, whether they're good or bad. Our feeling is they're
needed.
Yeah,
not necessarily good or bad.
They're not good, but they are needed, and so we think we're going to have to sort of go along with this until we can come up with a much better solution. And so until we can find a better solution, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
You take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.